Hey friends, welcome back to day 2 of our talk about how to make your faith your own when you've grown up in a Christian home. And today we're talking about testimony lust and how to have compassion on yourself and other people. So let's start with testimony lust, which is a phrase that James came up with because he's good at naming random things. I remember being on a missions trip when I was 15 and my team leader asking me to share my testimony. And I was kind of like freaked out by it because I'm like, what testimony? Like, I've been homeschooled my whole life. My dad was a kids pastor when I was a kid. Like, what do I have to share? Should I go out tonight and do drugs so that I can have a testimony tomorrow? And so I was praying about it in like a panic mode that night. And I felt like God spoke to me where Jesus says to his disciples, you can testify to my faithfulness because you've been with me since the beginning. I felt like God was speaking that to me like, Tiff, you've walked with me your whole life. You know that I am faithful, that I never leave you or forsake you. You can speak to that. And I think it's easy to want this like wow story of like, I was out like in prison and doing drugs and on the street, and then Jesus saved me and my life changed. And I want you to know, like, God does not require that kind of testimony from us. When people have that, that is amazing. But I also think that they would say those were the worst times of their life and that they've had so much brokenness to work through as a result of that. And God can redeem everything and turn everything around for good, but it doesn't mean that it was easy for them to have that testimony. But also you need to know, like, God doesn't require that of us. Like, as we live life with God, we're gonna experience hard things and good things. It's just part of being human. As we share each of those things with God and see that he is faithful in all of them, that can be our testimony. And that means that the older you get and the more things you experience in life, the richer and deeper your testimony gets. So if you're 15 right now and feeling like, but I don't have a testimony, don't worry. Like, you can speak to God's faithfulness and he will continue to build your testimony over your life. And I think James put it so well once when he said that part of the reason we have testimony lust is because we think of the gospel as being, I was a bad person, I met Jesus and I became a good person. And that's actually missing the whole heart of the gospel. Like, the heart of the gospel is that now I'm in relationship with God. And that doesn't mean I'm perfect or I'm fixed yet. I'm on this slow journey towards sanctification, toward becoming more like Christ, but I'm his. And so for James, he would look at his life and be like, well, I was a good person, quote unquote, before conversion, and now I'm still a quote unquote good person. So what has salvation done for me? But what salvation did was bring him into a right relationship with God, be able to have that friendship. So now let's talk about having compassion on ourselves and others. Because as James and I were talking about what it was like for us growing up Christian, we were like, yeah, we both kind of struggled with being very judgmental. Like, when we saw people doing things that weren't quite right, we were so judgy toward them. Like, I can't believe you would do that. I remember one time, even this is kind of weird and hilarious, but I was in a van with a bunch of youth group friends and my dad was driving. They were talking about this movie they'd seen and I was judging them hardcore. And finally I just spoke up and said, I've never been to an R-rated movie in my life. And my dad goes, yeah, you have. And I was like, no, I haven't. What movie? And he goes, The Passion of the Christ. That was my R-rated movie, which I think is hysterical. But I was just so judgmental toward others. And I think part of it was because I didn't appreciate brokenness and the process of sanctification. That becoming more like God is not an overnight fix. Like, it was like, I think, you know, growing up in a Christian home, if you haven't struggled with a lot of like really intense sins or addictions or hangups, like, it's tempting to think that it's just easy to like flip a switch and be like, I'm gonna act more like Jesus now. But we don't always appreciate how hard that can be, especially when someone's coming from a very broken place. So I'll give you an example of this. My mom was leading a Bible study a few years ago, and she said there was this lady in the study who just swore like a sailor. And my mom was like, I cannot believe this lady would call herself a Christian and have those words coming out of her mouth. And like, you'd hear that and think that's a fair thing to think, right? Well, then my mom finds out like what this lady has been through in her life and how much God has already done to change her life and heal her. And my mom realized like this wasn't like the place she was gonna end up. Like, God was still working on her. This was just where she was along this journey, and my mom was amazed at how far she had already come. And I just think that it's so important to have that kind of perspective, even to ask God to help us see people how he does, out of his lens of love and grace, and just to see the process and respect the process of sanctification, to realize that it's a journey. And I know in my life, it's like layers of an onion. Like, he'll peel off one layer of sin and bad habits and hangups, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I'm free, this is amazing. And then it's like, oh, there's another layer and I didn't even notice. Because God doesn't work on every single sin in our lives at the same time. That would be so overwhelming. Instead, he like takes things in his own time, his own way and pace. He just brings things up and convicts us of them and starts to work with us on them. And I know hearing that as someone who grew up Christian, you could be like, well, you have to like prevent someone from stumbling. And yeah, that's true. If someone's like walking in blatant sin that they're not willing to surrender to God, I think it's important to be like, I'm so concerned about you. Like, this is what I'm seeing in your life. But a lot of times when we're being judgmental to people, it's not that kind of sin. And usually we're not even going to the person. Usually we're just like complaining to other people in the form of prayer requests about this person who just isn't getting it right. And we're doing it because it makes us feel better about ourselves. And it helps us justify where we are because we're better than that person is. And so that is not a Jesus-like mentality at all. And so if you really are legitimately concerned about a friend and the choices they're making, it is okay to tell them, and that's actually awesome. Like if you see them in a just really bad relationship and you're like, I am so worried about you that this is not gonna lead you to a beautiful place, this is gonna tear you apart, like tell your friend. And if you're wondering like, how do I even share this kind of thing with a friend? I actually have a whole blog all about it, which I have linked in the description below, about how you share this kind of feedback with a friend in a way that's helpful and not hurtful. But if you're just complaining to everybody else, you're not actually doing that person any favors. And then I think one other thing that really helped me was realizing that this journey on earth is like learning how to walk. And you don't walk perfectly on day one. Like if a baby took its first few steps and then fell on its butt, nobody in their right mind would be like, you stupid baby, I can't believe you just fell. Everyone instead would be cheering the baby on like, you took your first steps, you're amazing. And like, why don't we treat ourselves and others that way? Like, look how far you've come. Celebrate what God has already done in your life. It's amazing. And then when you fall, when you make a mistake, learn from it. So you get back up and you're like, what tripped me up? How can I learn from this? We will keep falling throughout life. But a person who really walks with God long term is not a person who never falls. It's a person who gets back up every time they fall. So girls, I hope that can really encourage you. Please comment your thoughts below as well, because I would love to hear them. And I can't wait to see you on Tuesday for a video about how to enjoy being single, because this is another like super frequently asked question that we get. And I have what I think are some surprising answers that I never heard when I was growing up. And I wish somebody had told me these things. So I hope they can encourage you. I'll see you on Tuesday for that. Love you girls. Bye.